Friday, December 13th, 2024, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Happy Friday the 13th, Clive.
Scary, huh? What's
Yeah,
going to go wrong? Are we going to have a
unlock.
stock market? Are we going to have a stock market crash or what?
Well, I'm not too sure about that, but it hasn't been a very lucky start for the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, Rachel Reeves, and I'll show you why and the viewers as well here quickly. I'm just going to share the economic releases we had this morning. So here we go. Friday the 13th. Construction output minus zero point 0.4 is expected zero point 0.2, minus zero point 0.7 year on year. GDP negative minus zero point 0.1. Industrial production a lot minus zero point 0.6, expected zero point 0.3. I mean, it's just a nightmare. Even
Well,
the
Mario, what I see here is a sea of red. Everything's negative except inflation, which is positive. Oh, that's
yeah,
negative too.
that's called stagflation. And,
Yeah.
talking about inflation, there's CPI numbers coming out next Wednesday, and on Thursday, the Bank of England is expected not to do anything to rates, but I'm not too sure they might cut because we saw Switzerland, where you are, cutting rates in half, basically.
Yeah,
One,
amazing. It's a huge cut. It's 50% off the rate, so half a percent down from half 1% to half a percent. And then Canada's cut, and I think Europe has cut by 0.25%.
yeah, the ECB cut yesterday. So I think it's an unlucky day for Rachel Reeves. Do I think it's all to do with the Labour government, the new Labour government? Partly, but I think this has been brewing for over a decade since the '08 crisis. I think the policymakers thought they could save everything, borrow and print, and that it would bring everything back. But I think the Labour Party they took kind of the wrong road when they came to power, even though whatever road they chose was going to be difficult.
Yeah, I don't really think they had a lot of choice. I mean, as you say, Mario, this has been brewing for years, starting with the 2008 crisis. Well, of course, it really goes back much further goes back to 1971 when we came off the gold standard. But the thing has kind of got into overdrive from 2008 with the banking crisis, when the government basically printed endless amounts of money to save all the banks, and then seeing little or no effect on the inflation rate, we went into the COVID crisis, and they took the same decision to print huge amounts of money. And now, of course, we've got all that extra debt on the government's hands, and they're struggling to pay the interest. And obviously, an awful lot of people are richer than they were because the government's got poorer and paid out that money. So that money is floating around the system looking for a home.
Yeah, and talking about Rachel Reeves and being an unlucky day for her, I want to recommend this book. I read it a few years ago about the Templars by Dan Jones. I highly recommend it. So the Knights Templars, they were rounded up by King Philip IV of France on October 13th, 1307, which was a Friday. And why were they rounded up? Well, according to this book, is because the excuse given by the church, the Pope, and the king was that they became heretics. They committed heretical depravity. But when you look at the whole story, they started out as pilgrims, then they became soldiers, and they were bankers as well, Clive, because they had to trade. They had to go to the Middle East, or the Promised Land, as they call it, to fight these crusades. And along the way, they had connections, and they left money. They had to yeah, they had to. They invented international banking. So some people think it was because they became too powerful and had too much money that the King of France rounded them up.
Actually, Mario, the real problem was that King Philip owed them an awful lot of money, and the solution when the bankers won't lend you any more is to execute them. Of course, we don't have that anymore, but that was how they operated back then. So that's why he got rid of the Templars. Well, had them killed. They didn't know he didn't owe them any more money.
Did they get rid of all of them, Clive? That's the question. Because,
Well,
you
I don't
know,
know.
it says here the rise and fall of God's holy warriors. So some people speculate that they lived on, but anyway, they invented international banking, and yeah, the bankers are always like yeah, there's always problems. I'm not saying that's all, you know, I agree with you there. So, what else do you think is important, Clive, as we speak today?
Well, yeah, you sent me an article from I think from Zero Hedge about the state of the U.S. economy and more particularly the U.S. debt levels. I don't know if you've got that, Mario, but it
I do.
shows that the levels of spending in the United States are spiraling out of control, still under the old administration. If they carry on the spending rate that they have done for the last couple of months, we'll be running deficits of well over 3 trillion, which is more than 10% of the national debt. So you can see how fast the government is getting poorer and everybody else is getting richer. That's your inflation rate for you. It's 3 trillion on 30 trillion, and it will be more than that. Is a huge percentage increase in government debt.
Yeah, so here we go. That's the story here. Government spending shock. I'm not shocked, but anyway, U.S. budget deficit soars in worst start to the year on record. So yeah, you might be wondering, what do you mean start to the year? Well, it's the fiscal year starts in October. So for October and November, going back to 2010, look at it. I mean, it's over 600 billion already in 2 months. So you do,
So multiply that by six.
yeah,
That's 3.7 billion.
what, trillion. Yeah.
Trillion, yes, 3.7 trillion, which is with a national debt of in the hands of the public about 30 trillion. It's a much bigger increase than 10%.
Yeah, and with the GDP here, if you look, 29 trillion, that's more than 10% of GDP. And that's supposed to be in an economy that is doing well, where the stock market is doing well. And personally, Clive, I don't really think if you look at Europe, the UK, China, Japan, I think the whole world's slowing down. And the only reason the US looks good is because we've got like an everything bubble, and we've got a government desperate to try to keep things looking good before they leave office. So I think we're due for some turbulent times in the coming 12 to 18 months. Is that the way you see it?
Yes, Maria. Perhaps as we talk about gold on this channel, what do you think is going to happen to the gold price before the end of the year? Do you think we could get to 3,000?
Uh, I mean, I try to, yeah, it's earlier this year, I was looking at the gold chart, and I said we could get to 2,800 by October, and we got almost there, I think, in November, and then we corrected. I don't like to make predictions too much, but I saw that you're looking for it, so it would be nice if it got there.
I
But
mean, it's $320 away, which is more than 10% of the current price. And to do that in just 11 days or so, which we've got trading days until Christmas, would be a bit of a push. But there is a chance because we're not that far away from the all-time high. We're about $100 or so away from the all-time high. And if gold does have a push in the next few days, and it has been rising quite rapidly on the back of the news that China resumed its gold purchases in November. It wasn't a lot of gold, but it was 160,000 ounces. As I say, that's enough to make any girl happy. But maybe with China deciding to resume its gold purchases, other central banks will take their lead and start to do the same. So we might get a little bit of a push past the all-time high. And I think if we get past that all-time high, which is about $100 or so higher than the present price, then there'll be a lot of arbitrage traders and momentum traders diving in, and we might get that remaining $200 to take us past 3,000. Now, I'm not saying it's likely, but I think it's on the cards as a possibility.
Yeah, or like back in 1979, I think during the bull market in the 70s, gold started like at $35, of course. That's where it was prior to 1971. And then it went to 200 in end of 74, corrected back down to like 105 in 75, 76. And then we were at 400 at the beginning of November 1979, and then we got the Iranian hostage crisis, the Iranian Revolution. It was a mess. Oil went up to 40, and gold, Clive, jumped from 400 in November all the way up to almost 900 on January 20th. So it's possible. What could trigger it, I don't know. But I see that gold is also still going up nicely in all other currencies. So it's not just a matter of the dollar. But yeah, I think we'll reach 3,000 soon. And you could be right, though, 3,000 by New Year's. So we could have a nice Christmas celebration.
Well, I think the direction of gold over the long run is upwards. If it's kept pace, if it would have kept pace with the devaluation of the dollar, rather the increase of the US government debt since 1971, when they went off the gold standard, we should be near enough to $6,000 at the moment. So there's quite some way to go just to get back to a normalized price compared with government debt.
Yeah, was it around 200 billion back then in 71?
I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I did the maths a few months ago and I came to a figure of $5,800. But of course, with the latest increase in government debt, we're probably near enough to $6,000 an ounce of gold if you do the maths.
Yeah, and apparently Janet Yellen yesterday apologized for all the debt increase that they've had, like not just government, but the whole U.S. debt. I think it went up 15 trillion while they've been in the administration. But yeah, I've looked at M2. If you cover M2 by 40%, you get something like 27, is it 20? Yeah, $27,000 dollars per ounce, because that's what they use to cover the money supply with about 40% gold. Yeah, and 100%, of course, would be four times 27,000. And I think also the other metric, Clive, that I think is interesting to look at is the Dow Gold ratio, because back in 1932, at the and after the 29 crash, we got down to 2 to 1 gold, Dow Gold. We got down to 1 to 1 in 1980, 850, and the Dow was 850. And I think we're going back there again. And maybe we could look at this chart here, because I saw someone, and I've looked at this.
So that would put gold on $40,000 or something like that today.
Today, yes, but you never know. You could see some kind of correction in the Dow. I think it's more likely that the Dow Gold ratio would go near 1 to 1 if we had a big correction in the stock market. Or I could be wrong. We could have a hyperinflation, a melt up, and gold could accelerate much more than the stock market. But I saw someone posting on X the other day talking about this very long-term trend line of the Dow going back to, believe it or not, like the late 1890s. And they said the last time we broke through that trend line was in 1929, and that's what happened. And I extended it to now, And as you can see, we're breaking that line. I had looked, Clive, a few years ago at a line from here, just from here to here, and it was around 28,000. So, but I hadn't looked at this even longer term chart, which according to the guy who posted, is like a 125-year trend line, which is interesting. So maybe if we do correct in the Dow, and this is a logarithmic chart, so it doesn't look as steep as a normal chart, but we've got here a base of around 10,000. But of course, it's always moving. So let's say by 2028, if the Dow gets down to 11,000, or even if it gets down to like 15 or 20,000, gold, it's realistic that gold could be at 15 or 20,000 or thereabouts. Or we might see, Clive, the Dow back at 10 and gold at 20, which would make the Dow gold ratio at half. So you'd only need half an ounce for the Dow gold ratio.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting exercise to compare the price of gold and the Dow going all the way back to the 1900s. But of course, we're in a very different world since 1971 because we've come off the gold standard. So everything we learned before that is not as relevant because it was in a completely different world where there was some discipline about government finances. I think the reality is we're now in a world where government finances have no control over them. Yes, the US government puts from time to time, it puts a debt ceiling in place and it will have a new debt ceiling on the 3rd of January. But at the end of the day, they keep raising that debt ceiling. So really they're out of control in spending. And the net result of that is that other things which are tangible or needed or desired and which are in short supply tend to rise in price. So yes, we will for sure with gold, with equities, with Bitcoin, with house prices and so on. We will for sure have crashes. Crashes, they're like earthquakes or volcanoes. They turn up when you're not expecting them. They turn up somewhere and they happen. So there will be some very bad weeks, days, months, maybe even years. But in the long run, the money which is out there due to the government becoming more indebted, the money supply being printed, the Federal Reserve and the central banks cooperating with the government to print money and buy the government's debt, pushing money into the system. In the long run, it does mean that asset prices will tend to recover from the crashes that we have and tend to push higher. So yes, looking at the Dow gold ratio, yes, we might have a crash in the Dow Jones or the S&P 500. That's entirely possible. Or we might have to wait a few years before it happens. But realistically speaking, I do think that gold is one of those assets which is a little bit left behind at the moment. The rally we've been having for the last year or so is really looking very small relative to the kinds of rallies that gold had historically, which were of the orders of hundreds of percent, and we're about, I think, in the 40% or something for the recent rally over the last couple of years. So personally, I think there's a long way to go. There's a lot of catch up for gold to play, and yes, the Dow might come down, but I still think that the gold price will probably go up to bring that ratio closer to the 1-to-1 that we're talking about.
So basically, what you're saying, you don't see them allowing for a major deflationary collapse and that they will just keep printing and borrowing. So you favor more the scenario where we could see the Dow at maybe 50,000 and gold at 40, or 60,000 Dow and 50,000 gold. Mainly because there's no discipline in government spending. There's no monetary discipline anymore. I mean, we're seeing the central banks like the SNB, the ECB, all cutting now. And I think the Fed's expected to cut as well, Clive, next week. Even though we're here in the stock market, can you imagine when the stock market's correct by 10% and the economy goes into a recession? They're going to start the printing presses again as well. They're going to do QE, don't you think?
Yeah, it's become very difficult for Western governments, democracies, to engage in any kind of fiscal discipline now. Of course, they all try in their own ways, but there are so many forces pulling against it. You have the politicians who don't want to be seen as the one clamping down on some benefit or some scheme or some gift to the population in some way. You know, you've got if you cut benefits or anything like that, you're going to have rioting on your streets. It's very, very difficult in a free society to go backwards when you've started spending money and spending more money than you've really got. You know, it's a bit like if you happen to have a partner, husband or wife, you're working and he or she has got a credit card and going out shopping. And after a while, you notice that they're spending far more than you're earning. Now, you've got two choices. Either you say something and do something about it, and maybe they'll cut back on the spending. But if you let it carry on for too long, it becomes a habit, which will be very, very hard to stop. And so it is with the government. They've got into the habit of overspending. It's going to be extremely hard to come back from that now. You know, what are they going to cut? Take the United States. We've got 2/3 of the spending is what's called non-discretionary spending. They can't cut that. So then you've got the 1/3, which is discretionary, and of that, half of that's the military. Are they going to cut back on that? And the remaining 1/3, that's basically the jobs of people working for the government. I don't think they're going to cut back on that. So, you know, where's the flexibility? I hope that Elon Musk finds lots of ways to cut back on waste in government departments, but I don't know how much of a dent he'll make. I rather suspect it'll be very, very difficult for him.
Yeah, I read someone saying that unless the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, becomes a real department of the government, they will have no clout. They would just be an advisory group. And can you explain to the viewers what the difference? So what is in discretionary spending? Is that things like Social Security, Medicare? Uh,
Yeah, so it's basically it's healthcare, Social Security, Medicare. That's it, basically. That's
and
it.
also maybe public pensions, like government.
Yeah, that would come under Social Security, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, and then of course you've got the other side, which is the things that they don't have to spend money on, but choose to do so, like giving free money to Ukraine, as an example.
Yeah.
That's discretionary.
Well, they've just given them, well, they took 20 billion from, well, they say they borrowed it on the back of the Russian reserves and the World Bank, and then they sent the money to the World Bank. But yeah, so do you think, because I'm going to bring up this article here that came out today about the man of the year here, or now they call it the person of the year by Time Magazine, Donald Trump. And it says Donald Trump's election win sparks surge for banks and brokers. Market activity exploded as traders bet on a more business-friendly approach by the incoming administration. So you can see here how trading volumes have gone up gone up quite significantly. So Wall Street and the brokers are benefiting, but is Main Street benefiting, Clive? That's my question. What it feels like, and do you think Trump it will be able to bring back the economy, or is it too late? And it reminds me of someone wrote a month or so ago that in 1928 there was a very business-friendly president that was elected, Herbert Hoover, and Herbert Hoover was like in the mining business actually, and he became very successful. And yeah, he was elected in 28, came in power in March 2029. And look what happened later, 6 months later, to the markets and the economy. So, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, logically, if you have a buoyant stock market, you'd like to think that there's a lot of money floating around for entrepreneurs to be able to raise funds to start new businesses. So that logically ought to be good for the economy, although there's a good deal of a lagging effect. The, it might be more so now than it was in 1929 when it all went wrong. In 1921, we had that stock market crash, and then many people reduced their spending, and there was a recession, then a depression, and there were lots of bankruptcies. And the consequence of that was that people were withdrawing their money, specifically gold, because gold was money. They were withdrawing their money, their gold, from the banks, and the banks therefore were struggling because the people they'd lent the money to were also in financial difficulties and couldn't repay it, and certainly couldn't repay it immediately. So there was going to be, and there was in fact, a massive banking crisis as people started to hoard their gold coins under their pillows rather than trust the banks, which were all going to go bust. And that's when, in 1933, President Roosevelt ordered that everybody in America turn in their gold coins for paper money. But as of today, there isn't this difference that it's not gold which is circulating. You can turn up to the bank and ask for your money, and provided they'll give it to you, which is another story, in theory, you could get out an infinite amount of cash because the bank simply has to go to the Federal Reserve and say, here's some of our assets. We've got this bunch of mortgages or government bonds or whatever you like. Please lend us the money so we can give it back to Clive Thompson, who wants to withdraw his billions.
Yeah, and you were talking about the banks, Clive, and I wanted to touch upon the story that came out. I think when was it? About a week ago, or so, about what's happening in the UK and probably in other countries as well. People scamming clients of banks and people in general, not just with gold, but with other things. Maybe you could touch upon that.
So there's several aspects. I'll just talk very quickly through the steps which follow. First of all, the types of scams. There's lots of scams, but the four major ones which are going on at the moment are known as the romance scam, where you fall in love with somebody online who doesn't really exist. The lottery and sweepstakes scams. The technical support scam, where they ring you up and say your Norton antivirus is due for renewal. We've charged you 550 francs or dollars, whatever it is. If you don't agree, we can give you a refund. Just let us know. And these calls, and then there's the government scams where you might get a call saying, this is your police force. We have an arrest warrant in your name. Press 1 to speak to an investigating officer. So these sort of scams, they start with robotic calls. So these are robots and these robots are sending out literally hundreds of thousands of calls around the world, hundreds of millions of calls daily, and very, very few of them get responded to because most people are smart enough to know when you get a robot saying you've got a bill, press 1 if you don't want to pay the bill and that sort of thing. Most of us know it's all a scam and don't bother. But there'll always be a certain percentage of people who get fooled into it. They press the button to find out what happens. And then when you press the button, you get hooked into somebody who's working for the scamming organization. Now, these people who are mostly, and I'm not denigrating any country here, but it's a fact, the organizations which are running these scams are in, broadly speaking, 3 countries. It's Nigeria, it's India, and it's Jamaica. But there is some going on from the Eastern Europe. And I stress that most people in these countries are law-abiding citizens whose mothers taught them not to steal. But the trouble is there are some quite large criminal organizations in these countries where there are armies of employees who are at the next phase of the scam, trying to see which of the people who've called up are potentially victims. The next phase will be if somebody is vulnerable enough to be fooled by the phone call. There's various means of deception and trickery to persuade the typically elderly or frail person to withdraw cash or whatever. And he'll be put in contact with a more senior person in the criminal organization, typically described as a bank manager or a senior manager or whatever. And that person will manage the withdrawal of funds from the victim. And when the victim withdraws the funds, they don't pass those assets directly to the criminals. The criminals are staying very, very secretive behind the scenes. So the victim unknowingly is passing the money to what's known in the UK and elsewhere as a money mule. Now, most of these money mules, they are innocent people who think they've got a side job, a side gig, a side hustle. They think they've got a job from someone somewhere. They've been tricked into it, and their job basically involves getting, in simple terms, getting some money into their account, taking a cut, and passing it on to the scammers in an anonymous way. And that's where gold can come in. The So, as an example, the money mule, who may not realize that he's doing anything wrong, will have been tricked by the real scammers in India or Nigeria, wherever it is, into believing that somebody in Nigeria wants to buy some gold, but they can't buy it directly in the UK. So what they're going to do is send the money to the money mule's account, or arrange for the money to be picked up somewhere, and the money mule then will buy the gold and ship it abroad. Now, the reason they choose gold is because the price of gold has gone up a lot, and it's possible to ship a large amount of money in a very small space. If you think about it, a bar of chocolate, it's $70,000. Bar of chocolate, a 1 kilo bar, which is smaller than a bar of chocolate, it's about $70,000. Now, if you're trying to pack $70,000 of cash into an envelope and post it to Nigeria, it would be quite a bulky packet. But of course, when it's a bar of gold, it's very, very small. You could hide it in, some other material. It's not obviously gold to the customs and so forth. So that's one of the reasons they're using gold. But of course, they've also like to use Bitcoin to transfer money overseas. But the trouble.
One question about the gold. You said that the mule will be doing that, but they also talk about the fact that they're convincing elderly people or anyone really to buy gold. Let's say they go to a reputable dealer, buy the physical gold, and then they convince these people to store it with the mule. Or I mean, you have to be a little bit naive to give your gold to just a stranger. I mean,
Well, the fact is, there's an awful lot of vulnerable and elderly and wealthy people who are tricked into believing that their money in the bank is at risk from fraudsters and scammers. So what they're basically told is, we need to keep your money safe, and the way we're going to keep it safe is to put it in gold where the scammers can't get at it, or we need to put it in a new account. So there'll be lots of so there's many variations of this, but basically they use trickery and persuasion and deception to trick the elderly person into believing that he has to get his money out from where it is in the bank into something else. Cash,
yeah, I agree
gold.
with that. I agree with that, Clive. But if you buy gold and I agree that with that reasoning, you don't want too much money in the bank, because the banks are there might not just be scams that come and steal your money in the bank, but the bank itself could collapse. So why would you buy gold, let's say from Gold Investments, and then store it with someone else if Gold Investments has a reputation and can store it for you? That's what I don't understand.
I'm afraid these people who are victims are very, very manipulated. The scammers are extremely clever in what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, of course, I mean, your listeners, Mario, are very intelligent people. They're not going to get tricked by this sort of scam. But there's that tiny, tiny percentage out there who have never heard of it, they don't know about it, or their brain doesn't work well enough because they're very elderly. And the reality is they're being scammed. I looked at some statistics here. And this was just a statistic about the money mules in Europe. Just get it up here. In the year 2022, they arrested in Europe 2,500 money mules. These are individuals who probably didn't know they were doing anything wrong, but were receiving stolen money from elderly victims who had effectively taken 17.5 million and transferred it across overseas to scammers in different countries. And they transferred it overseas by principally four methods. Five methods. One was by buying gold and sending that abroad. Another one was buying gift cards and scratching it off and telling this is Apple gift cards or things like that, or Google gift cards, and then telling the scammer what the number on the back of the card is. The third way is to transfer it via Bitcoin, but that's getting problematical because the banks are they're watching over people who open a brand new account and transfer Bitcoin abroad straight away. That's obviously a big red flag. Obviously, sending cash in small amounts is also going on. And the last way is they get the money mule to effectively go to a shop, buy goods like an iPhone, and ship it to Nigeria, India, wherever the final destination is. But the money which comes into the money mule's account, or which is handed to him in cash, is basically coming from a victim. And quite often, the people who are being arrested as money mules are completely innocent. They could be, for example, Uber drivers who've been employed to go and pick up the cash, or taxi drivers, or some other person who thinks they've got a side gig that they have to pick up the cash or receive cash in their account. There's a story, as example, I'll just show you the headline here. It was in the paper just a couple of days ago. He writes, I got quick cash in my account, but it was too good to be true. So this is a story of someone who needed some money. He saw a thing on Instagram saying you can make a lot of money, link up with me. And he did. And they said, all you have to do is receive a bit of cash in your account, take a cut, send the rest on, and you'll be rich. Well, little did he know that he was going to get arrested. I mean, it all started when he tried to turn up at the bank to withdraw the cash which had come into his account. So basically, someone had been tricked into sending him £4,000 in this case. The cash arrived in his account. He went along to his bank to withdraw the money. But by the time he got to the bank had been alerted by the victim's family that their relative had been robbed. And so when he put his cash card in, it froze his account, kept his cash card. And as he writes in the paper here, the consequences for him, apart from getting arrested, which obviously was the least of his worries, the bank closed his account. He's been banned from having a bank account for 6 years, and he can no longer get a credit card, a loan, or a mortgage. All because he thought he'd got a legal side business, which he didn't realize. And so that was in 2000. That was for this year. But 2022, they arrested 2,469 of these people. 2023 in Europe, in just 3 months, they arrested 10,000 people like this. Uber drivers, courier service people who thought they've got side gigs. Of those 10,000, they jailed over 1,000 of them. Often they were innocent victims who didn't realize they were doing anything wrong, but they'd taken a cut or they'd handled the stolen money. They apparently saved, not that's a big one, the losses from these 10,000 people were roughly 100 million euros, or put it another way, 10,000 euros per money mule who's acting as the middleman. They stopped 32 million euros going to the money mule's account. And how much money did they recover? Zero.
Yeah, I mean, the story about the guy who saw something on Instagram, what I would say, if it's too good to be true, there's something wrong. And the old saying of there's no such thing as a free lunch as well. Does this happen in the US as well, Clive, or is it more?
Even more so in the USA.
Wow.
It's a huge. I mean, in the United States, last year I read they'd invested tens of thousands of people. Now, these are the people in the USA. They're the intermediary guy, the money mule, who are not the criminals. The money mules don't realize that they're engaging in criminal activity. The real criminals are in these other countries and are hiding themselves very, very well, so that the money's not going to the money never goes electronically to their accounts, so you can't trace the individual who's behind the crime. The money's going to them in gold, in Bitcoin, in gifts, in gift cards, and of course, packets of cash. That's how it's getting there, by anonymous means. So the guy who's sitting as piggy in the middle, unfortunately, takes the fall for the crime. And some police forces have come to understand that they're probably stupid people who haven't got very much brains, and therefore perhaps they shouldn't be too harsh on them. But some police, they're not all the police forces are the brightest in the world, and many of these people are getting arrested and found guilty of handling stolen money and going to jail.
Yeah, I think this is also maybe, I don't know if you agree with me, a bit of a symptom of the whole system that we have. It's become so the money has become so bad. There's so much money flowing around. There's so much it's become so hard for the average person with the cost of living that they'll do anything, not just here in Europe or the US, but also in Nigeria or India. That people are hard up, so they will resort to these kinds of operations. It's pretty much like a reflection, I would say, of all the central bank programs that they have. But central bankers, of course, are respected people, but in a way, they're doing the same thing because they're printing money out of thin air, lending it to their friends so they can buy loads of stuff. So I think it flows through society, unfortunately. And yeah, what do you think, Clive?
That's exactly what's happening. I mean, at the end of the day, when you have an impoverished population or part of your population impoverished, some of them are forced into criminality. Others get into it and find the gravy train is just too good to not do it. And of course, they all think they won't get caught. And unfortunately, with these types of online scams, because most of they're online in a certain sense, they're actually right. They're not going to get caught, not the real criminals. Obviously, there will be a lot of people sitting as piggy in the middle who don't realize they're facilitating a crime, who do end up in jail. But there's one thing which was very interesting. I read, Mario, in the article which you just showed. It seems that UK banks have now been told by the regulator that they have to refund victims of, I don't know if it's online fraud or just fraud, up to £85,000. So I don't know how that's actually working. Do you just turn up at your bank and say, "Someone help themselves with some money from my bank account? Can I have a refund, please?" Or what? Because I
I,
guess the question of proof is going to be hard.
I think it's more online, and but also that's why the banks here they treat you like you're almost a child when you want to take out some money or transfer money. They call you and say, "Are you sure?" I can understand why they do that now. But anyway, Clive, I think this is going to be probably our last talk before the end of the before the new year. I think you're going away, so
That's
just
right. So
yeah.
we'll.
Just want
I wish everybody happy Christmas and happy New Year.
Yeah. So with that though, can you could you give us your thoughts for 2025? And I know that you've been around longer than I have, and you've always said that as bad as things can get, things always recover. But what's your main prognostication for the next 12 months or so?
Well, I think Elon Musk is going to rename his company AI.com. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but that's entirely possible. It wouldn't surprise me if we have a number of change of governments around the world driven by political crises, because I think political crises are born out of times when there's high unemployment and when the inflation rate's rising. I think we will see higher inflation next year. I also, on the financial front, I think that we will get towards the end of next year and be looking at interest rates which are on the rise. And I think we'll be looking at inflation, which is on the rise. And as far as our favorite topic of gold, I think we'll be looking at the gold price on the rise. So, if obviously I don't say you should put all your money in gold. I think we have to be very diversified in everything. But with the levels of government debt going up, I think that those assets which are in limited supply and which are desired, those who have that money from the government getting poorer will be wanting to buy those assets. And the ones which will be going up the fastest and the most are the kinds of assets you want to own in your retirement. So by that, I mean things like healthcare. You might want to go to an old people's home. You might want to have someone looking after you in your home. you might want to buy a luxury house with a snooty drive. You might want to hang a nice painting on your wall by a famous artist. The sorts of things that people with wealth, those who've been saving all their life and accumulated something, will want to be spending their money on. Those are the kind of things which will be rising most in price. The rest of the stuff that the man in the street consumes, they're mass produced by robots, and they will rise in price, but they won't be rising in price by as much as the inflation of the money supply and the inflation of government debt. So, when you hear the inflation rate, be aware that they're only talking about the things that the masses consume, and they're not talking about the things which are in short supply, like housing.
Yeah, what about banana? Would you buy a banana and put duct tape on it? Would that go? Did you see that banana
Yeah.
went for sale? I'm just joking.
Well,
Anyway.
Well, I think you can make the price of your net worth go up by a lot, provided you put if you own 10 of something and you have one of them and put a big price on it, you make the rest of them worth a lot. Can I tell you a little story?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a true story, and you can look it up on the British Museum, or it won't be on the British Museum site, but and I won't tell you any names or anything here. But a few decades ago, there was a campaign in Britain to save a painting by a famous artist to stop it being exported abroad. So the seller of this painting, which was a famous gallery, managed to round up a whole bunch of people willing to donate money to save this painting from being exported out of the UK so it could be sold to the British Museum instead. The National Gallery, maybe it was, I think. Anyway, long and short of it turned out to be quite a scandal because the people in question, of course, the gallery got to sell the painting, so the gallery got its money, was very happy. But the people in question who had rounded up these large sums of money to save the painting were suspected of being owners of paintings by exactly the same artist.
Hmm.
And since the price of this painting was many millions, it made their paintings, which they might have paid 20 or 30 or 50,000 for, now, because it's by the same artist, worth millions. So you can imagine I mean, I can't remember how it all turned out. Whether I think the British Museum or the National Gallery, I think they were found guilty in the subsequent investigation and sanctioned for I don't know why this turned out to be the case, but it was. But my point is, if you own 10 of something and you sell one of them for a very high price, it means the rest of them are theoretically worth a ton of money.
Well, it
So
reminds
bananas on the wall.
re,
I'm stocking up on bananas, Mario. They could be worth a lot.
reminds me of Michael Saylor and Bitcoin, actually, and the whales.
I mean, you're saying exactly. No, it could be Bitcoin, it could be Nvidia, it could be anything you can think of, Mario. If someone puts a price on one of them, the rest of them are worth so much more.
Yeah, great, Clive. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I won't do that yet to the viewers because I'm still going to be active and hope to speak to you in the new year.
Thanks, Mario. Have a lovely Christmas. Happy New Year to you. Bye bye now.